By the time I opened my front door that night, I already knew who was standing on the other side. I could hear them before I saw them. The same voices that had spent the last 6 months trying to push me out of my own life, now speaking softly, almost politely, like they hadn't spent half a year treating me like a stain they couldn't scrub off. When I turned the porch light on, there they were in the rain. My mother-in-law, Linda, with her hair flattened against her temples. My brother-in-law, Mark, pretending to look calm. And my husband's sister, Renee, holding her coat tight around her like the weather had personally offended her. None of them looked triumphant. That was the first strange thing. The second strange thing was that Linda's hands were shaking. "Claire," she said, and her voice cracked on my name. "We need to talk." I stood there with one hand on the door and one hand on the chain lock, looking at the three people who had looked me in the eye after my husband's memorial service and told me I had no right to stay in his house. The house they had called family property. The house I had spent 3 years helping pay for. The house I had nearly lost. Not because I was weak, but because they thought grief made people stupid. "I don't think so," I said. Mark took a step forward. "Please, just let us in." I laughed once, but it wasn't funny. "6 months ago you told me to pack a bag and leave. 6 months ago you called a lawyer and said you'd have me out by the end of the week. 6 months ago you acted like I was some woman who married into the family and forgot her place. And now you're standing on my porch in the rain asking to come in?" No one answered right away. That silence told me more than any confession could have. Rain slid off the porch roof in thin silver lines. My kitchen lights glowed behind me. On the wall inside, just out of sight, hung a framed photo of my husband, Ethan, smiling with his arm around me at Lake Michigan the summer before everything fell apart. It had taken me months to stop crying every time I looked at that picture. Not because I was weak then either, because love can leave the deepest mark when it's gone. Linda swallowed hard. "We wouldn't be here if we had any other choice." "There was always another choice," I said. "You just never liked any of them unless they worked in your favor." Mark looked past me into the house, and I knew he was seeing what he used to think would be his. Not the neat curtains or the old hardwood floors. He was seeing assets. He was seeing value. He was seeing the thing he thought he could take when Ethan was no longer here to protect me. What none of them understood then was that Ethan had been protecting me long before he was gone. And what none of them understood now was that I had spent 6 months learning exactly how far their greed had reached. When Ethan was alive, he was the kind of man who made a room feel calmer just by walking into it. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. He had that quiet, steady kind of kindness that made people trust him before they even realized they were doing it. He worked as a project manager for a construction firm in Columbus, and on the outside our life looked ordinary in the best way. 2 cars, 1 mortgage, a small dog who shed on everything, summer trips, Sunday pancakes, grocery lists taped to the fridge. But behind the ordinary, there had always been friction where Ethan's family was concerned. Linda liked to call it concern. Renee called it honesty. Mark called it business. Ethan called it what it was whenever he got tired enough to drop the politeness. Pressure. His mother had never forgiven him for not becoming the kind of son she could control. His brother had never gotten over the fact that Ethan was the one who stayed stable, while Mark bounced from one half-baked scheme to another. Renee loved to act like she was above it all, but she had a talent for dropping little comments designed to make me feel temporary, like I was some passing weather system in a family that belonged to her. At first, I tried to win them over. I cooked. I showed up. I remembered birthdays. I helped Linda carry boxes when she moved her basement into a storage unit after a leak. I bailed Mark out once when his truck payment was behind and he swore he'd pay me back in 2 weeks. He never did. Ethan paid it instead. And when I asked why, he just said, "Because if I don't, he'll turn it into a war." That was the thing about Ethan. He had spent so long keeping the peace that I didn't realize how much it cost him until he was gone. It happened on a Thursday in February. We were supposed to have dinner at home. He texted me from work that he was leaving early because his chest felt tight and he wanted to stop by urgent care. I told him to go, that I'd meet him there, that I was already on my way. He never made it. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already in the back with monitors on him and people moving too fast. That night split my life in two, before and after. Before, I had a husband who made coffee wrong and kissed my forehead every morning. After, I had a silence so deep it made the whole house feel unreal. The worst part wasn't the hospital. It wasn't even the memorial service. It was the days afterward, when the casserole dishes stopped coming and the reality of paperwork began. Bills, insurance, accounts, the awful mechanical business of surviving someone else's absence. 3 days after the memorial, Linda arrived with Renee and Mark like they were attending a meeting instead of visiting a widow in shock. I remember standing in the kitchen in sweatpants with a mug of tea I hadn't touched, because I had been crying over it for so long it had gone cold. Linda looked around the house as if she were assessing a property listing. "We've been talking," she said. That's how she always started bad news. "We've been talking." As if the whole family had reached one peaceful conclusion and I just happened to be late to the meeting. "What about?" I asked. Mark leaned against the counter. "The house, mostly." I stared at him. "What about it?" Renee gave me that tight, fake, sympathetic smile she used when she wanted to sound gentle and sharp at the same time. "Claire, you know this house has been in the family a long time. It's in Ethan's name," I said slowly. "We bought it together. We paid the mortgage together." Linda made a face like I had insulted her. "You were married, yes, but his inheritance went into this place. His father helped with the down payment. It would make more sense for everyone if you moved out for a while." I almost didn't understand what she'd said. The words were too cold to make sense in a normal human brain. "Moved out?" Mark crossed his arms. "You're not thinking clearly right now. You're grieving. We get that. But the market is good. If we sell, there's enough to split things properly. Split things properly, like I was a line item. Like the woman who had been holding my husband's hand when he took his last breath was now an inconvenience to be packaged and removed. "I'm not leaving," I said. Linda's expression hardened. "Claire, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. This is my home." Renee let out a little sigh, as if I were making the whole thing difficult. "It's not forever. Just until you get yourself together." I looked at her. "Get myself together?" Her mouth pressed into a thin line. She knew she had gone too far, but not enough to apologize. That conversation lasted less than 20 minutes. By the end of it, Linda had suggested I stay with my sister. Mark had said the mortgage could become a problem if I couldn't handle it, and Renee had said there was no point forcing a fresh start into a dead situation. Dead situation. The phrase stayed in my head for days. What they didn't know was that Ethan and I had already had private conversations they were never invited into. I knew the house situation better than they thought. I knew the mortgage. I knew the insurance. I knew enough to understand that they were trying to move faster than they should, which usually meant they were hiding something. And I was right. The first real crack showed up when I called the bank. Ethan and I had a joint account, plus a savings account he'd opened years earlier when he was still paying for his mother's car repairs and pretending it didn't drain him. The woman at the bank was kind in the stiff, professional way people get when they know they're about to tell you something awful. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter," she said, "but there was a recent change to the account permissions." "What kind of change?" "There was a removal of your online access and a request to freeze withdrawals over a certain amount." I stared at her. "Who requested that?" She hesitated. "We have a form here with your husband's signature." My mouth went dry. "That's impossible. I'm sorry. It's on file." I spent the rest of the day in a fog. When I got home, I spread papers across the kitchen table and looked at every copy of every document I had. Ethan had kept meticulous records. He always had. He labeled things. He dated everything. He folded receipts and tucked them into envelopes like the universe might one day ask for proof. That night, I found a manila folder in the back of the desk drawer in the study. It was hidden behind old manuals and warranty cards. Inside was a letter addressed to me in Ethan's handwriting. I sat down so fast my knees hit the chair. "Claire, if you are reading this, then I am not there to explain it myself. I need you to trust me and not let my family rush you. They will try. They will say it is for your own good. It isn't. The house is yours. The papers are with Mr. Harlan, and he knows what to do. The account changes are not what they seem. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to make sure everything was finished before I said anything. If anything happens, call him first. And Claire, no matter what they say, do not leave the house. Love, Ethan. I read the letter 3 times before I could breathe normally. Then I read it a 4th time because my hands were shaking so badly I thought I might tear the paper. The next morning I called Mr. Harlan. The old estate attorney Ethan had mentioned only once, and when I told him my name, he said, "I was hoping you would call sooner." I met him in a small office downtown with beige walls and a faint smell of coffee and old folders. He was a patient man in a blue tie, with kind eyes that didn't waste time pretending bad news was anything else. He laid out the truth, piece by piece. Ethan had rewritten his estate documents 6 months before he passed. The house had been placed in a trust in my name. There was a separate life insurance policy, and there was one more thing. Something Ethan had done because he had finally started paying close enough attention to his family to see the pattern. He had suspected Mark had been using family money, and not just casually. Ethan had found enough inconsistencies to keep copies of bank statements, loan documents, and email trails. He had also found, tucked inside some of the paperwork, a signed mortgage support agreement that Linda and Mark had tried to bury in the mess after his passing. "That signature," Mr. Harlan said, tapping the paper, "is not legitimate." I felt my skin go cold. What does that mean? It means someone may have submitted false information to the lender. Not your husband. Someone else. I remembered the bank form. The changed access, the rushed demands, the way Linda had suddenly become very interested in what was mine and what wasn't. "So they didn't just want the house," I whispered. "They were trying to cover something." Mr. Harlan gave me a long, steady look. "I believe so." I didn't feel victorious when I left his office. I felt sick. Ethan had known. He had known enough to protect me, and yet he had carried it alone, the way he carried too much of everything. I cried in the car for 20 minutes before I could drive home, but after the crying came something else. Clarity. I stopped answering Linda's calls. I stopped pretending I was available for their version of grief. When Mark showed up one afternoon and said they needed to sort out the house matters in a mature way, I handed him a copy of the trust letter and told him to leave. He skimmed it once and smirked. "This can be challenged." "Then challenge it." He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw something break through his arrogance. Not fear exactly, more like irritation that I had stopped being easy. The next few weeks were ugly. Linda tried guilt first. She brought up family, memory, respect, the fact that Ethan wouldn't want everyone fighting. When that didn't work, she tried concern, saying I was making things harder than they had to be. When that didn't work, Mark tried intimidation. He talked about lawyers. He talked about the house needing repairs. He talked about how lonely it must be for me to stay there alone. He thought loneliness was a weakness. He had no idea that loneliness had already taught me how to survive without his permission. I changed the locks the following Monday, not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I finally understood that boundaries were not cruelty. They were survival. A week later, a title company called to verify some details on the house and casually mentioned a recently attempted refinance request. My stomach dropped. I hadn't made one. I went straight to Mr. Harlan. He put on reading glasses, looked through the paperwork, and said one sentence that changed everything. "They tried to use your husband's name after he was gone." "What?" "Not in a literal legal sense. I believe someone attempted to present himself as authorized under an older agreement. It looks like they were trying to leverage a form he signed years ago and stretch it far beyond what it allowed." It took me a second to understand. Then it hit me. Mark had been playing with paperwork. The kind of man who thinks if he can make the file thick enough, nobody will notice the lie hiding in the middle. Mr. Harlan leaned back. "Mrs. Carter, I think your husband predicted this." "What do you mean?" "He left a packet with instructions to release only if there was interference. He said if the family pushed, you were to get everything in writing and contact the county recorder, the lender, and an investigator he had already spoken with." I stared at him. "An investigator?" He nodded. "A financial one. Your husband was very careful." There was grief in that realization, but there was also something else. Love. Not the soft kind, the hard kind. The kind that builds protection before anyone else can see the storm. We opened the packet together. Inside were statements, copies, dates, emails. Notes in Ethan's handwriting. Mark had been in debt for months. He had borrowed against an old family property the wrong way. He had taken advantage of Linda's loose handling of money and convinced her to sign forms she didn't understand. Ethan had tried warning him twice. Mark had laughed it off. Then he had used one of Ethan's work contacts to falsify an estimate on a side project, hoping to secure a loan extension without raising questions. Ethan had documented every bit of it. I was stunned. My husband sat on all of this? I asked. Mr. Harlan's face softened. He was trying to handle it quietly. He hoped his brother would correct himself. That sentence hurt more than I wanted it to, because it sounded exactly like Ethan, always hoping the best in people who had already shown him the worst. The major twist came 2 weeks later when the investigator called. His name was Dale Mercer, a retired auditor with a gravelly voice and a talent for making a lie sound smaller than it wanted to be. He asked me to meet him at a diner just off the highway. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents tying Mark to a contractor scam involving fake materials, invoices, and a shell company registered under a variation of Renee's old business address. At first I thought that meant Renee was involved too. And maybe she had been, at least partly. But then Dale pointed to another page and said, "Your husband didn't just uncover the numbers. He left me a note saying if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got the truth before they twisted it." He opened the note. "Claire is not to be manipulated. My family will try. Give her the full picture. She'll know what to do." I sat back in the booth with tears in my eyes and a laugh stuck in my throat. Even gone, Ethan had been one step ahead. The full picture was uglier than I expected. Mark had been using family sympathy to hide financial holes for years. Linda had signed more than she understood because she trusted him and because she liked the feeling of being needed. Renee had helped cover conversations by acting as if she was keeping everyone calm, which really meant redirecting attention whenever questions got too close to the truth. There were unpaid debts, misleading claims, and one very sloppy attempt to use the house as collateral in a way no lender in their right mind would have approved if they had been honest. But honesty had never been the point. The point had been control. As soon as they realized I had started digging, they changed tactics again. That's when the phone calls got nastier. Not from Linda. From numbers I didn't know. One caller said I should be careful about talking too much. Another suggested it would be better if I remembered who had a real claim on the family property. One message was so vague and so threatening that I saved it, printed it, and handed it to the sheriff's office. I didn't do it because I wanted drama. I did it because I was done being scared in my own house. The sheriff took the complaint seriously once the investigator's report was added. The title company flagged the refinancing attempt. The lender launched its own review. And when the county recorder compared the signatures and timelines, the paper trail started unraveling exactly the way Ethan had said it would. By the 4th month, Mark's world was coming apart in public. He lost the loan extension. Then he lost the business account tied to the contractor job. Then he lost the storage unit where he had been keeping materials he never should have been able to pay for in the first place. Renee, suddenly very concerned about her own name being attached to anything, stepped back so fast it was almost impressive. She called me once to say she had tried to help everyone, which I interpreted as a clean and cowardly way of saying she was ready to pretend she had never chosen sides. Linda, meanwhile, kept insisting none of it was as bad as it seemed. That was when I knew she was still protecting Mark, even now. There was one person in the family who surprised me, though. Ethan's younger cousin, Hannah, showed up one Saturday with a box of old photo albums and a face full of shame. "I should have told you sooner," she said, standing awkwardly in my kitchen. I waited. She rubbed her hands together and looked at the floor. "I heard Mark talking last year. Not all of it. Just enough. He said if Ethan ever stepped out of the way, things would get easier." I stared at her, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know he meant this. I thought it was family drama. "I'm sorry." I believed her. Not because her apology fixed anything, but because she looked horrified by what she had heard and even more horrified that she'd stayed quiet. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from the people who cause the damage. Sometimes it comes from the ones who finally admit they were afraid. I didn't invite Hannah into the whole mess, but I thanked her. That mattered. By the 6th month, everything had reached the point where someone was going to have to answer in person. That was why they were on my porch in the rain. That was why Linda's face looked like she had aged 10 years in a week. That was why Mark could not quite meet my eyes. "Tell me why you're here," I said. Linda took a shaky breath. "We need help." I almost smiled. "That's interesting. You had a lot to say about help when you thought you were the ones doing the helping." Mark shifted under the rain. "Can we just talk inside?" "No." He looked offended, which would have been funny if the situation hadn't been so absurd. The truth came out in pieces. The contractor case had collapsed the same week the lender completed its review. Mark's latest scheme had exploded. A lien hit a property he had been quietly trying to leverage. The apartment Linda had moved into after Ethan passed was now tied up because she had co-signed something she shouldn't have. Renee was done taking calls, and Mark, who had spent years acting like he could always outrun consequences, was suddenly staring at a pile of them. They were not there because they loved me. They were there because they had nowhere else to go. Linda's eyes shone with tears she was trying not to let fall. "Claire, I know we weren't fair to you." I laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. "That's one word for it." Her mouth trembled. "Your husband would have wanted us to work this out." "No," I said. "My husband wanted you to leave me alone when he was gone." He wrote it down. The rain got heavier. It made a soft drumming sound on the porch rail. Mark finally spoke, and his voice had lost most of its usual arrogance. "I made mistakes." I looked straight at him. "You forged papers. You tried to take my house. You scared me in my own home. That is not a mistake. That is a pattern." He flinched, which almost made him look younger. Almost. "I was trying to fix things," he muttered. "No," I said. "You were trying to keep taking things." For the first time, Linda turned on him. "You told me the refinance was routine." His jaw tightened. "Because if I told you the truth, you would have panicked. That's not your decision to make." I could have let that moment go on for hours. Let them tear each other apart. Let the rain wash over them while they argued about who had lied more and who had only lied a little. But I had already spent too many months living inside their chaos. So I stepped back and held the door open just enough to show them the hallway, the warm light, the framed photo of Ethan on the wall. The life they had nearly taken from me. "I'm not letting you in to save you," I said. "You came here because the ground finally gave out under your feet. That is not the same thing." Mark looked at me like he wanted to say something cruel and couldn't find the strength for it. Linda wiped her face and whispered, "Where are we supposed to go?" I answered honestly. "That part is not mine to solve." Then I handed her a list. Not money, not sympathy. A list of legal aid offices, a temporary housing hotline, and the name of a counselor who worked with families in crisis. I had found them weeks earlier. Not because I intended to rescue the people who hurt me, but because I wanted to make sure that if they ever arrived at my door, I could offer something human without surrendering a single thing that was mine. Linda looked down at the paper and started crying harder. Maybe because she understood the difference between mercy and access. Maybe because she finally realized I had done more for her in 30 seconds than she had done for me in 6 months. Mark stared at the list, then at me. "You're really going to do this?" "Do what?" "Leave us with nothing." I let that settle between us. Then I said, "You left me with a house full of silence, a stack of lies, and a grief I had to carry by myself. I am not leaving you with nothing. I'm leaving you with the truth." That was the end of the conversation. They left in the rain. Not glamorous, not dramatic. Just 3 people walking back to a car that suddenly looked too small for all the damage they had carried into my life. The consequences didn't stop there. Mark was eventually forced into a settlement and ordered to repay money he couldn't fully replace. The contractor case cost him his reputation in a town where reputation still meant something. Linda had to sell the condo she had just moved into because she had signed documents she never should have signed. Renee lost a friendship she cared about more than she admitted when it became clear she had helped smooth over things that should have been stopped. As for me, I kept the house. Not because I wanted to cling to the past, because it was mine. Because Ethan had made sure of it. Because letting them take it would have turned his final gift into their victory. I stayed. I painted the living room. I planted a small dogwood tree in the backyard where Ethan used to sit with his coffee on Sunday mornings. I took the old guest room and turned it into a tiny office for the consulting work. I started with the settlement money and the insurance policy. The first time I signed my own company name on a contract, I cried in the parking lot afterward because it felt like breathing again after months underwater. A year later, I still keep Ethan's letter in the top drawer of my desk. I don't read it every day. I don't need to. I know what it says. Trust me. Do not leave the house. They will try. In the end, the part that hurt the most was not the greed or the lies. It was how easily they had mistaken my grief for weakness. They saw a widow alone in a quiet house and assumed I was already halfway gone. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence can be a weapon, too. Silence can be patience. Silence can be a person learning every detail, gathering every document, waiting for the truth to stand up on its own. And when it finally did, they had nowhere left to hide. A few months after everything was settled, Hannah came by again with her little boy and a box of apple turnovers from a bakery downtown. We sat in the kitchen while he played with the dog on the floor. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the furnace. "I'm glad you stayed," she said quietly. So was I. Because in the end, that was the real justice. Not that they suffered, though they did. Not that they apologized, though a few of them tried. Not even that the law finally caught up with the lies. It was that I remained. I kept the home Ethan and I had built. I kept the life they said I had no right to protect. And when they stood at my door 6 months later, wet, desperate, and out of places to turn, I didn't see powerful people finally brought low. I saw the exact shape of their own choices coming back to meet them. That is what karma looks like when it's real. Not fire, not fantasy. Just the truth, standing quietly on your porch in the rain, asking to be let in.